Good afternoon and happy Friday. And welcome to Bick Gardner's presentation for GM on appearance of automotive finishes. My name is John Kowalski. I'm part of the marketing team here, and our presenter today, which I think most of you know or may know, is Ray Roby. We are recording this, and we will follow up with a link to that recording. Also, following the presentation, we'll, time permitting, we'll answer any questions or comments you may have. So please enter in your questions in the Q&A box located in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and we'll get to them including the presentation. So with that, Ray, it is all yours.
Thanks, John. So today we're going to start with a little bit of like the theory behind appearance measurement with the wave scan, and then we'll go into some stuff that's more specific to just GM. Okay, so why is it important? What's important is that you have uniform appearance. So customers don't always know what they don't like about something, but if something's not uniform, that's a big indication to them that there's a poor quality issue. And why is this important? Because you have different horizontal and vertical surfaces. You have add-on parts and the body parts, which are usually different substrates. Everybody paints a little differently. They use different technologies for the paint, and it's a real challenge. So what is appearance influenced by? First of all, there's the waviness or the orange peel. This is the larger wavelength that you can see from farther away. And also there is the brilliance or the DOI, which is the smaller wavelengths. And these usually need to be up closer to see them. But sometimes even from far away, the part or body can just look kind of fuzzy. And that's something that people don't like. So I think everyone knows how to measure gloss. It's basically a reflected image. It focuses on the surface, where the wave scan actually goes into the surface and measures the structures or the waves themselves. So when we look at orange peel, like outside, what's happening is the light's getting distorted and it's not all coming back to our eyes. So we see these light and dark areas or the patterns that you see with the orange peel itself. So here you have to make sure you pay attention to the distance that you're observing. So when you look from like say 40 centimeters, you can see the shorter wavelengths. Here the one sample has a short wavelength of 17. And from 3 meters away, you can see the long wave. And in this case, the long wave is 6. And this is just another example of how this looks. So if I'm up close, I'm going to see the individual letters. And when I'm farther away, I just see the pattern. So what wavelengths can we see from these two different distances? From 3 meters away, you see a lot more like the 10 to say the 30 range. And when you're closer up, say 40 centimeters, you can see like say the 1 to like the 3 millimeter range. And then we do have another area under 0.1 millimeters that is actually, you cannot distinguish the waves themselves because of the resolution of our eye. And those wavelengths we have to cover differently. And again, that kind of is that fuzzy appearance that I was talking about. So how does the instrument work? There's a laser and there's a detector, and you run the instrument over the surface and you get an optical profile. And then this is what it looks like. So it goes back to the sensor depending on where you are in the surface, more or less gets back to the sensor, and that gives you your reading. So in the beginning, when we started out with the wave scan, we broke things down into long wave and short wave. And basically 0 would be smooth, and the higher up you get with long wave and short wave, you get a worse appearance. So for these two samples, you have a short wave of 15 for the top one, sample A, and a long wave of 10 for the top one. And for sample B, you have a short wave of 17 and a long wave of 31. So in this example, you can really see the differences, and it does kind of work with what the long wave and short wave tell you. But in this example, this is a newer paint system, and so what happened was the numbers weren't always correlating to what we saw visually, so we needed to break these down into more distinct categories. So what did we do? We broke them down from 0.1 millimeters to 30 millimeters into different categories, and we call these WA, WB, WC, WD, and WE. So the WC and WD, as you can see in the little picture, pretty much are the same as the long wave, but it's broken down into two different things. And then the WB is pretty much like the short wave. So when we look at these two samples, I mean, most people like sample C better than sample D, but it's always a preference. But now you have a better understanding of what it looks like because you have this whole structure spectrum on the right side that shows you all the different values, and you can get a better understanding of what that means. So the other part of the appearance is the waviness plus the brilliance. So this contrast, sharpness, or distinctiveness, and that is the smaller wavelength. And if we use a regular gloss meter on these parts to measure, we would have some issues, especially if we measured on a curved surface, because that light gets diffused and it's not all getting back to the gloss meter. So the number that we get from the gloss meter may not be an actual gloss measurement. And also, because there's so different types of coatings now, if I have a 2K in this example versus a 1K, and my refractive index is different on these two, I could look at them and think that they look the same, but they wouldn't measure the same. So here's the example of what DOI is, which is distinction of image. And on the left side, you can see all the little details in the pole and the windows and everything, which means it has a good DOI. And on the other side, it's quite fuzzy, and that is an example of poor DOI. So what did we do? Oh, first of all, so we calculate the DOI based off of the structures that are less than 0.1 all the way up to 1. And anything under 0.1, remember I told you before that we cannot see the individual waves in that small of structure. So we had to figure out a way to get this measurement. So we put a camera in, and then we take a picture. And depending on how much light is scattered outside that center point, that gives us a dullness value. So what's important about dullness is even if you have two different refractive indexes on your 1K and your 2K, dullness is independent of that. And it also works on curved surfaces. So now we have the whole structure spectrum all the way from 0 up to 30 millimeters. And like I said, the distinction of image is basically a function of dullness, WA, and WB. So everything that can be changed in a paint facility, it doesn't matter if it's a part supplier or an OEM, all these things affect how your final appearance is. So it's really important that you measure so you can figure out what's going on and figure out how to make your appearance better. So for example, this top graph just has a lot of long wave and a lot of short wave, and you can see in the structure spectrum, everything, all the numbers are just really, really high. So if I if I optimize the clear coat, I decrease my long wave, but I still have a lot of short wave. So that's also not a good appearance that anyone would like on their vehicle. So now, if I sand the primer and I decrease all this shortwave from the primer, all I can see is long wave, which also isn't my favorite appearance. So now if I optimize the sanding of the primer, I can get this double hump that you see on the right side at the bottom. And that's kind of what we think from Vic's perspective is something that gives you a better appearance because you're not long wave or short wave dominant. So this is just a summary so you can see how the curves changed. And again, the bottom one, I think, in my opinion, looks the best. And it does have that double hump. So specifically for GM, we want to talk about that because that's what we're on the call for. So again, this is always the objective, right? We want paint that's smooth, shiny, uniform, and we want it to look really good on the vehicle because that makes customers come in and say, ooh, I want this GM vehicle because it looks great, right? And it has a high quality. The other thing that's important is you have to measure so that you can get better in the future or at least understand what's going on in your process so you can either maintain quality or improve it. So we talked about this, but it's not always bad to do a little bit of a review. Again, it's the laser, you get the optical profile, and then we break it down into different things. And again, here are the different mathematical filters. And here's the same picture I showed you earlier about the poor DOI and the good DOI. And then again, how the equation works. All right, so if we look at these two pictures, the short waves, like I talked about, you're really seeing like very small structures, and the long waves are the longer or the bigger wavelengths. And again, you don't want to do gloss measurements on these type of materials because you're not going to get all the individual waves that you need. All right, so here's an example of a more short wave, the red one, or a less short wave, the blue one, and you can see in the structure spectrum over here how much different they are. So basically all of your variation in this example is coming from your WB, and we've seen many times that WB really affects how you visually see the material on the vehicle or the part. So WB is an important one to look at, even if you're just doing R-value and you're trying to make sure you meet a specification. You can actually get a good R-value number and have some high WB numbers. So here's what we talked about with the other examples too. Too much short wave in the middle, too much long wave, and then where you get a balance between the long and the short wave. And from Vic's perspective, we think it's really important for this balance between however you want to calculate it. I mean, some people use the B value, some people use like PAQ, some people use accuracy. But when you get a surface that is one way, super long wave or super short wave dominant, and you try to put those two parts together, you're really going to see the difference between the two materials. So for GM, they had originally these 10 panels, the ACT panels. The panel number 1 was very high peel, and the panel number 10 was very low peel. One thing that's important is these panels are all black. They don't have any other colors. So sometimes when you're looking at, say, a silver or even a metallic or a mica coat, you're not going to really get the same appearance. So you're kind of looking at it and making a decision, and maybe I pick 7 and you pick 8, but it's all subjective to how I feel. The other thing that's important about these panels is it's not assessing anything underneath the top coat. It's just looking at the top coat to see how wavy the top coat is. So an example we had today, we did some measurements and everyone kept saying we don't like it, but when we hold up the ACT panel, we're getting like a 7. But when we look at it, we don't believe it's a 7, and that was because there was a lot of smaller structures that you weren't taking into account with the ACT panel. So these are the two instruments. We have a new one that just came out, the WaveScan 3. That one does pass-fail now on the screen. I know a lot of customers have asked for that. And also it can do harmony match between panels with the instrument now, which is also something that people have asked us about for a long time, so they don't have to visually compare the panels. They can just look at the number. And then the microwave scan is what's used for small parts. And here is the equation for the rating value. It's kind of complicated, but it was just something that I wanted to show you guys so you understand that the majority of this comes from the long wave and not a lot from the short wave. And here's just an example to show you how these different R values look and the effect that they have. So again, the short wave has a lot less of an effect than the long wave on the R value. When you get to certain levels, of course, you have more of an effect with the short wave, but it takes a lot to get the R value to move when you increase your short wave. So here is the two different calculations that GM uses, the DOI, which is the function I talked about before, DU, WA, and WB. And the R value, which is a function of WB, WC, and WD. But I'll have to tell you, it's majority WC and WD. About 80% of that calculation is off of those two numbers, and just a little bit of WB gets put in there. So who else uses orange peel scales, and what do they use? Right now, General Motors, FCA use R-Value. Honda, VW, Subaru use long wave, short wave. Subaru actually has their own equation now that we put into the software and the instrument because they came up with something that they like. BMW uses N1, N4. Ford, Kia, and Honda use CF. But Kia and Honda, or Hyundai, use also another number called the pack equation that gives them like that balance that we were talking about. And then Toyota has their own instrument, and they use W1 through W4. So here's just an idea of the specifications for the GM products. So there's low, medium, and high. And these might have been modified slightly since I put this presentation together, but the idea is that you want to be in the 75th percentile of the best in segment, and that's these green numbers. And anything in the red obviously is not where you want to be. But one thing that we have to always talk about when we do this, this is for body and not necessarily for add-on parts, because a lot of times the plastic materials used in the add-on parts actually causes your R value to be lower than these numbers. So for fascias and all the other add-on parts, these numbers would be different. And that's all I've got. I know Corey's on. Maybe Corey can add anything that I missed.
Yeah, Corey is on, and thank you, Ray. Great stuff. If there are any questions too, log them in the Q&A box. I think that's in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. We'd also be happy to unmute anyone's microphone too if we want to discuss any aspects of appearance or Ray's presentation. We'd be happy to help. So please, let us know. We're a resource for you, and we have time right now. So let us know how we can help you. Corey, was there anything else you wanted to add based on Ray's information here? Maybe he's not here.
Maybe we lost him.
Maybe. Have a question from Sarah here. What did our B value look at?
The B value looked at the balance between long wave and short wave.
Okay.
Let me see if I show you that. It might take me a second. Let me stop sharing and then I'll do it again.
I'm here, by the way, guys. Sorry, I unmuted my phone, but not the WebEx.
Yes. Yeah.
Anything you want to add, Chris?
No, nothing specific to add. I'm just interested to hear some questions from our attendees.
Yeah. So I think you talked about the B value. Have another question from George. The micro versus dual wave scan. They take readings do they take readings the exact same way? The only difference is that the micro is for smaller parts?
So the micro does not have WE. So if you had like Nissan as a customer or something like that, you can't use that equation in the micro. And also the dual, you can turn off what's called plausibility, and you can measure more dull surfaces than you can with the micro. And the other thing I have to say about the micro is you have to be quite aware of the fact that the wheelbase is so small that you really need to make sure that you keep it perfectly rolling across the part and don't tilt it at all, because that will affect your measurement.
Okay. George, or I'm sorry if I mispronounced it, maybe Jorge, I'm going to unmute you here. Did that answer your question, or do you have any follow-ups?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, no, thank you for the answers. Yeah, that answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else we can help with, or what we got you on the line here? People get sick of us talking in our voices.
No, I just thought about the fuel doors that we take the readings for the fuel doors at some plants. We're starting to implement that at all of our plants to be consistent, and that first, the question of whether or not we will be able to achieve the same numbers as on the body. Typically see lower readings on fuel doors. So that's something we gotta to take on and make an assessment on how close to our spec we can go with the fuel doors now that they are all plastic.
Sure.
The best thing I can tell you is that you're probably not going to get the same number. You're probably going to get a lower number, not because of the instrument, but again, like I was talking about before, because it's the plastic surface and it really does affect the number. We did some studies where, say the body's like a 7, a lot of times the add-on parts may measure like a 5.5, but people think that's okay visually. I mean, of course you have to do the visual studies to decide what you want your specification to be, but I can tell you I've seen it where they're usually at least a unit lower than however the body is measuring. So just keep that in mind when you're working on your specs.
Thank you.
Good. You bet. And feel free to reach out to any one of us. We can help as you go through those evaluations. So thank you, sir.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the balance structure. So if I'm 0, technically I'm perfectly balanced. If I'm on the left side, then I have more long wave. If I'm on the right side, I have more short wave. So technically you want to be 0, but we also did some work with some different OEMs where people kind of prefer the balance to be a little bit more on the long wave side and less on the short wave. So again, this is something that we work with you guys on to try to figure out, exactly what you want it to be. And the other thing is that, this is really color dependent. So if I have like a silver, I may have to have a different balance specification than, say, if I had a black. So they're just some things to be aware of.
Okay.
So
Great, thank you. And
is the B value also mostly dependent on W, C, and D, like the R value, or it
No.
incorporates a
The
lot
balance,
more of the B?
it B value has pretty much everything DU, right, Corey? DU too, right? Now that I said that, now I'm not sure.
B value, no, I think it's entirely WB and WD. So it's essentially the balance between those two. And so if the B value is negative, that means the WD is too high relative to the WB. And if the B value is positive, that means the WB is too high relative to the WD.
Yes, that makes more sense than what I was going to say. Thank you for being on. But yeah, the R value is pretty much WC and WD. So that's one thing when you're using R value, you have to be careful with, just because of the heavy weightedness to the long wave.
Okay. All right, I'll meet you again, sir. Thank you, Corey and Ray. Follow-up question from Sarah. She asked, our B value look at? She's asking why. Is that right, Sarah? Let me find you here. Silver and black difference. Sarah, you are unmuted. Do you mind elaborating?
Hi,
Okay.
you didn't understand my why question. No, you had made the statement.
No. I took a guess, but
You had made the statement that silver would be different than black, and are you just saying acceptance level to the customer, silver would be different than black, or it would actually measure different?
No, because a lot of times the silver has more shortwave in it, just because of the nature of the flake. And it does cause it to read differently than, say, a black that doesn't have any metallic flake in it at all. So you'll get more shortwave inherently in a silver than you would in a black. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but you would read the shortwave, yes?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you would still pick it up.
Yep, but it would be definitely higher than, say, a black.
I think the other part of that, though, is that just visually, even if it measures the same with the wave scan, because they're different colors, just our perception of it is different, and that different amount, the same amount of waviness can be more acceptable on one color than another.
Yeah, no, I agreed. I just want to make sure that, so the silver, so why don't we, I mean, you were saying earlier that the balance is so important. I mean, why haven't we explored that more in the past? I guess I know we gave up on the B value pretty quickly. Because we were seeing things that didn't align. I don't know the whole story there, but it seems like if we're actually looking for, a little bit more long wave and a little bit less, and a little than short wave, but still close together. I mean, why? How did we get where we're at, I guess?
So, okay. It was a bad rollout. That's all I can say. And we didn't have enough information. And I think we tried to push it out to the plants too fast. And then things got, where some people, didn't understand the numbers or something like that was going on. And so everything was kind of not the way it should have been. Like, we should have done more colors before we set the spec up, but we only did black in the beginning. And I think the rollout was just not handled very correctly, is my opinion.
Okay. I mean, if we were to relook at this, would we shift what that green is to where we're okay with a little bit, I guess, more short? Yeah, I don't know which way it would go, but
you would go more negative, so you'd be like -4 to maybe 2, something like that. And then the other thing that we've been talking about, I mean, Dan Green and I have been talking about, and I think I talked to you about it too, is the instruments now can do harmony. So you can actually use the B value to harmonize the one part to the body position. And I think that would be a better way of doing it, because then it wouldn't necessarily be a different specification for every single color. You would actually have a specification that said, this is what I want my difference in the B to be, not an actual spec. Does that make sense? So if we decided that the delta B between the fascia and the body had to be less than 1, then that could go for all colors. Because then you're kind of measuring apples to apples again, even if it's different colors, instead of actually having a shift spec. So that would be my suggestion on how to move forward.
But that's
what do you think, Corey? Ooh, go ahead.
But that's just addressing the difference between a panel versus another panel. I guess, you know, I mean, a lot of the questions that I'm getting are all driven from that silly deck lid from LGR that with the concave surface that seems to, I don't know, we don't know, but it's visually not what it's like reads an 8 and we think visually it looks like a 6 to us or whatever it was, you know, and is that because our waves were so disparate?
So we have to go back and look at that again, because that was like
a million years ago. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, something like that, like, you know, we could always look at some of the other equations that we have, like the one that we did for Audi. That one might help with that situation, because it's going to give you the maximum amplitude of the biggest wave. And that's probably what we're seeing, and the R value is not picking it up. I mean, we looked at this. I mean, this is probably, I don't know, 3 years ago.
It's probably 1.5 to 2 years ago. Yeah.
So that would be something that I also would think would be good, and it'll also give you the minimum wavelength under a certain level and the amplitude of that, so you can really tell what's going on with the coding. I mean, we wouldn't want to do it like all the time, because it takes a little longer for the instrument to calculate, but it's something that I think would be definitely something we should try.
Okay. I think I'm out of questions.
Okay. Thanks for asking.
Thank you, sir. Okay, back to our questions here. Next one is from Greg. Are the scans affected by vibration of the part?
It depends how much. I mean, we do a lot of measurements on the line when the line is moving, and the numbers are pretty good. But if you had like a ton of vibrations, it definitely would affect it.
Okay. Greg, you here, sir. Did that answer your question? Can you hear us? Are you there, Greg? He may not have his audio on. So hope that answered your question, but thank you, Ray. Another question here from Kristen. Is there a tool and standard to measure appearance on matte finishes?
So if Dan Green's on, he might want to answer that question, but I'm not going to like the answer. But We do have an instrument that we're going to come out with that will be able to do matte finishes, and hopefully sooner than later. It's in development work right now, but with all the COVID stuff, everything's taking longer than we expected in the beginning. But we are totally aware that that's a necessity, and yes, I agree with you, and we will get that done.
Sounds good. Dan, I'll unmute you here if you have anything to add or say.
No, Kristen, that's a fair question. So it is something that we're working with BIC with, is to evaluate the matte surfaces. We've provided, quite a few samples to our team to get that going. And, there are other ideas and concepts we're trying to look at too for matte finishes. So Kristen, I'll follow up with you internally about that as well.
Good answer, Dan.
Yeah, so I guess, Ray, I think something that, I know you and Sarah were just talking about with the deck lids and everything, but there's always the question of, are we doing our standardized work correctly when we measure vehicles, right? So since the BIC wave scan is a two-dimensional measurement tool, right, we're not capturing a full three-dimensional surface. Should we be evaluating both X and Y direction and averaging them? Since especially on the vertical surfaces, we might get good readings, but it's not matching what we see coordinating to like the long wave or R-value.
Yeah, this is an interesting point, and I know in the beginning, everyone wanted to measure, perpendicular to the ground on the vertical surfaces because they got a better number. And again, does that number actually correlate to what you see, or should you measure horizontally and vertically on those vertical surfaces because that is more what you see with your eye? I agree with you. We were going to do this study, weren't we? And we never got to it yet.
Yep, that was one of those COVID delays.
But
Blame it on COVID.
Blame it on COVID. I definitely agree. If you measure vertically on a vertical surface, you're going to get a lower number because you have some micro sags just because of it being a vertical surface. So it's definitely something that is worth looking into.
Okay, thanks, Dan. I'll mute you again here. And if anyone, like I said, if anyone has any more questions or wants to discuss something, please enter it in the Q&A box or just say unmute me and I can do that too. We'll be sending follow-up materials, a recording of this webinar as well as the presentation that Ray gave. We'll share that with you. You'll probably get that Monday morning. So be on the lookout for that. Ray or Corey, are there frequently asked when it comes to appearance and just some of the challenges that you guys get?
Corey, you want to go or you want me to go?
So the question was, what are some of the challenges that we see with measuring appearance? Is that correct?
Yeah, what are some frequently asked questions that you guys get around the appearance?
So I know for me, I'm the guy people call when things don't work right. Well, they call Ray too, so I shouldn't say that. But one of the common things is that they'll get a failed message when you try to measure, and the reason for that is the surface is too dull to be measurable. So there's one of the things, as Ray mentioned, that the wave scan measures is called dullness, and it's essentially a measure of reflection haze. It's how much the light is being diffused as it bounces off the surface. And so when there's too much diffusion, when that dullness value is too high, the measurement principle of the wave scan breaks down, and it can't measure surfaces with too high dullness. So we have a certain range. Let me pull up a slide to show you guys. So this is comparing the Wavescan Dual to our old Wavescan DOI, but the comparison is the same between the Wavescan 2 or the Micro Wavescan and Wavescan Dual. So the reason it's called the Wavescan Dual is it has a dual light source that allows it to measure to a higher dullness range. So you can see that this green range you're seeing on the screen right here, this is the optimal measurement range for the Wavescan. Above that, the measurement principle gets a little dicey, but there is yellow range that you see for the Micro Wavescan and the Wavescan 2, now the Wavescan 3. That yellow range is between 40 and 55 dullness. And for the Wavescan Dual, it's between 65 and 80 dullness, where it's measurable, but it's not really optimal, and so you really only ever want to compare readings in that yellow range with other similar surfaces that also measure at a similar dullness. And so this has to do with the, whether you can measure in that range or not has to do with the plausibility setting in the Wavescan. If you've ever seen that setting either in the Wavescan or in your organizers or something, that's what that means. With plausibility on, it will only allow you to take measurements when the dullness is in that green range. If you turn plausibility off, that's when it allows measurements in that higher dullness yellow range. So if you are having issues where you're trying to measure like a primer or something and it's giving you a failed message, try turning plausibility off and it might give you readings then. But just know that you only want to compare those those aren't going to be perfect readings, and you only want to compare other similar surfaces in that range.
And the other thing is, remember, it's dullness and not gloss. So even if something, you can have like two different glosses, and that actually the higher gloss could be duller, and you won't be able to measure that. So just be aware, it's not necessarily gloss, it's dullness. And like I talked about before in the presentation, that's why, the dullness is it's a camera and not, just a light like a gloss meter, because it's two different measurements.
Excellent. Excellent. Are there any frequently asked questions that you get, Ray? Or a lot of things that you see reoccurring over and over?
I mean, most of the time, like I talked about before, because, all these values, everyone wants one number that is going to be the pass-fail number. And I think with appearance, it's not always that simple, because you're not getting enough information from one calculated number. And it's not just, one OEM. Every OEM has the same problem. And a lot of these equations, were created back, 20 years ago. And we need to do some work to get them better or add another number or something like that, because I think that's what's important. And that helps things make more sense to what we see visually. And also, I think now we're getting a lot more critical with what we like and what we don't like. So there's a lot of work to be done, I think, on these different issues, but we'll get there eventually.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Excellent. Any more questions from anyone on the line here, or any comments? Just ping me in the chat or in the Q&A box, and I can unmute you, or I can read the question here and give it a few more minutes. But yeah, the presentation, the recording will be coming out Monday to you all, so you can take a look at that, and feel free to reach out to Ray or Corey. Corey is our senior applications specialist here at Bick Gardner. You can reach out to either of those two, or even reply to the presentation materials that I send out. Someone in marketing can get you in the right hands from the technical side of things. So I think that is it. Unless anyone comes in under the wire, I think we'll wrap this one up. We appreciate the discussion, the comments, the questions. Always great when people are talking instead of hearing silence on our end here. So thank you for that. Much appreciated. And with that, have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend. And thank you, Corey and Ray. We appreciate you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend.
All right. Bye.